And they're like, turn off the air conditioning units. The airs are too bad. I'm like, well, if the air's too bad for an air conditioner, do I want to breathe it? And so, but that's what they did. And so, and then of course, all the walls are made fireproof. And then the outside of the buildings are made out of concrete and stucco. So you don't really have anything to burn, And so, and that really makes it, good morning. Thanks for tuning in for Investment Insight. And so we were talking about Pepperdine fires and walls. And so they built the entire campus with that in mind. So when the fires hit Malibu, they didn't lose a single building. And if you watch a picture, all sides of the campus burned, except for the front, but part of the front burned too. And it's amazing, when they start talking about rebuilding Malibu, you just pray that, and it's not going to happen because the government's going to give the money out and they're not going to pay attention. But every new house should be required to be built with those standards, and they're not going to do it because, I grew up in Missouri. Well, St. Louis, Missouri is also famous for what? A bunch of rivers. Okay, so when I was growing up in 1993, the big flood came in and basically engulfed everywhere around St. Louis because the Missouri Mississippi River is flooded. Well, one of the biggest jokes you would say is, the best investment is a house in a floodplain because the government will pay you 3 times to rebuild it, and you never rebuild it. And so what a lot of people have been proved of doing is committing fraud is they would actually buy houses in the floodplains as an investment because the government kept paying for them. Now, the last time I believe they paid, the government finally said you got to tear the house down. But if you go to, there's a city called Chesterfield, Missouri, where almost all the St. Louis Cardinal baseball players build their houses. Well, guess what was underwater in 1993? Where every one of those houses is. But they built what's called a levee. And the levee's supposed to protect you. I'm telling you right now, if that levee's up to there, and there's water up to there on the other side of that levee, do you want to be the house next door to that? They used to have farmers in 1983, they didn't want their fields to flood. So they go to their neighbor's house, they take dynamite, and they blow up the levee next to their neighbor's farm. Because that would mean that the water would dissipate and wouldn't go over their levee. So you got a lot of, but at the end of the day, and I don't want to pick on any developers here in Manchester, but I guess I will. If you go over there towards Doak Road, they're building a lot of stuff. And if you want to have some fun, why don't you pull up the FEMA flood map? They're building houses on top of the river shed for the Duck River. What could go wrong? And the fact that our city government approved it is nuts. Yeah. I mean, that's where you have to get involved in government because the people doing it, they're not going to be paying for that. They're going to sell those houses to somebody from out of town. They're not going to know it floods. And then they're going to buy it. And then guess what's going to happen to your property tax? Your property taxes and your property insurance. You're going to pay for it. Yeah. There's no free lunch in economics. Well, the first question they asked today about was the tax forms. So, as we all know, 1099-R is always the first one out because that's retirement distributions. And because you've got to pull money out of an IRA before the year's over on December 31st, 1099-Rs are always the first form to come out. You pull money out of your IRA in January, it's on 2025. If you pulled your money out in December, it's on 2024. So that form comes out first. Now, what is the most common thing accountants miss on the 1099-R? You guys know. Some of you should know because your accountants have missed it before. It's the QCD distributions, qualified charitable distributions. When you give money out of your IRA to charity, it is not considered income. It's not considered taxable income. So on your 1040, line 4A shows how much money comes out of your IRA. Line 4B shows how much is taxable. If you've given money to charity out of your IRA, please look at your tax return. Pull up the 1040. It's 4A and 4B. And some accountants are even putting QCD next to the thing. Don't miss that tax deduction. You got to be 70 and a half to get that tax deduction, but it's pretty powerful. So please don't forget. We are seeing, like, no joke, almost everybody that does this tax break is not getting the deduction because they're forgetting it. I would not want to tell you how many times I've been arguing with accountants, and will continue to argue with accountants that don't even understand this law. This law has been around for longer than I've been alive. Okay? It's not new. Okay. To 99 D&I, dividends and interest. We had a president named George W. Bush, and he came up with this thing called a qualified dividend. Qualified dividend is a dividend that's taxed at long-term capital gains instead of short-term capital gains. Do you want long-term capital gains, or do you want a regular dividend for taxes? What do you guys think? Long-term, right? Because the tax rate is lower. It's really great that we get a lower tax break. However, they amend these forms all the time because they haven't calculated the dividends correctly. So it's great they made the change, but every time they do a change, they make taxes more complicated, which means there's a higher chance of errors. Then you got your K1s. These are going to come out starting next week for the next, like Hayden said, there's 3 batches. We're going to do a podcast about that today. That'll come out on Thursday. But that is something to be aware of. Those are going to come over the next 3 weeks. Do not file your taxes yet. By the way, even if you get your return, if you want us to look at the returns, we've offered a service now for several years where we're not accountants, but we'll review for simple mistakes involving investments. We're not going to say we're going to be accountants. We're not going to guarantee your tax return. But if we find easy mistakes, we're happy to tell you. Okay? And we work with a lot less clients than an accountant does. And remember, accountants have 4 weeks to see everyone. How wonderful could it be? You know, terrible job. So give them a little break. And then you got K1s, which are, of course, partnership income. If you have a partnership, if you bought a private investment, if you bought any of these type of things, the K1s come out March 1st, which means you probably won't get it with the mail till March 15th or 20th. Because the mail can take 2 weeks. Okay? So that's the big thing on taxes. So we're going to do some more stuff on this. Let us look at the returns. We're happy to do it. We're happy to give it a look over. Okay. So we are going to, I thought this is a kind of a fun fact, if you guys saw this. This is nice airport if you can get to it. No subway, no highway, no bridge. So the country of Peru has a big city called Lima. Anybody ever been to Peru? I've been to Peru. So one of the weirdest things about Peru, when I flew into Lima, is they have millions of basically homeless people living on the side of mountains. And the way you know they're homeless is the government has built steps on the mountain with water and basic utilities on the steps. And so like you fly into the city, and there's like 7 million people, at least when I did this has been 15 years ago, living basically poor. And I was going there to see Machu Picchu, which is the big, thing on the mountain, so climbing up there, and it was fun. But it's really kind of eerie. But they're building a new airport, okay? So the Jorge Chavez International Airport is a sign of why government turbulence can be a trouble. We look at, unfortunately, when Joe Biden got in office, what's the first thing he did? He removed all of Donald Trump's executive orders. Now Donald Trump's in office, what's he doing? He's removing them all. Well, this is very, very inefficient government because you're changing the whole way every time. And guess what's probably going to happen after 4 years of Trump? Most likely, somebody else is going to go in there. What are they going to do? Remove all this stuff. I hate executive orders, if you couldn't already tell. I think it's pretty much disgusting because the founding fathers said Congress and the president are supposed to build consensus, and you're not supposed to have a king. And the executive orders to me are a king, because that one person makes all the decision. So I hate them. Maybe I won't get shot today, but both parties love them, but I hate them. So they're building a new $2 billion terminal. And they're supposed to be getting flights in 7 weeks, but there's no way to get there. So they built the terminal, but they didn't build the roads to get there. And here's a great example. Here is the river that needs a bridge built. And if you guys remember, they just reopened, is it Highway 40 over Pigeon Forge today to 2 lanes? So now, or is it 26? Maybe it's 26. They just opened it this morning. I just read that it opened this morning. So it took us a while to build a bridge. Maybe they need to start pouring some footers. Anyway, we'll see how that goes with Lima. It's always famously, airports have been historically known for over budget and lots of issues. I think it's the Japanese airport that was sinking into the ocean, or maybe it was the Hong Kong airport. And of course, the St. Louis airport, where I grew up, they fought for 20 years so they could have 3 runways when it landed. By the time they got done with the fight and the lawsuits, all the airports had gone, or the TWA had gone bankrupt, and they didn't need them anymore. And so now, so it's always, one thing I do like about Nashville Airport, if you guys didn't know this, it's actually a private venture. It's not actually part of the government in the same way most things are. So when Nashville goes out and they expand the airport, they borrow their own money to pay for it. So they actually, when you go fly, you pay the fees and you pay for that airport. And so they keep expanding because they recognize Nashville's become a hub. And my anticipation is they're going to eventually have direct flights to Tokyo, which would be pretty exciting. But they've got a lot of international flights. Ireland, Iceland are now coming direct flights from Nashville. London, of course, has been there for a while. And Frankfurt. You can now fly directly to Germany from Nashville. So it's pretty cool. We got some cool things going on. But air travel continues to be a big expansion because, people, it's a lot easier to fly than it is to drive everywhere. And so airplane business is really big boom. If you saw last night when Donald Trump was talking about tariffs, he said very specifically, I remember the Australian press asked him, is Australia going to have tariffs? He said, from steel and aluminum. He said, Australia's probably going to be okay because you guys buy so many planes from us that we actually have a trade surplus with you. So he said basically he'll probably give them an exemption. So that was kind of interesting. Obviously, when we talk about tariffs, one of the biggest challenges you have right now with tariffs is the origin of where something is made. Why do you think it'd be hard to know where this was made? What do you guys think? I mean, it says St. Louis Cardinals, right? So where should it be made? No. This says St. Louis Cardinals. This is made in St. Louis. Oh, I actually didn't look till just now. Made in China. Right? So, yeah. And so one of the things...
Our flags should be made in the U.S.
Oh, I agree. I think more stuff should be made in the U.S. If we learn anything from COVID, we couldn't get medicine. We couldn't get masks because we don't make them here. I mean, are you kidding me? And even today, I think 70% of generic drugs are made in China. Now, if we go to war with Taiwan and you can't get your blood thinner, what's going to happen to people? They're going to die. You're right? Yeah. So if China keeps pushing to attack the United States, we got to think a little critically here. I'm not saying, and both administrations, Biden and Trump, have been negative on China. They both have done. It's actually a bipartisan issue. But one thing China started doing is they started putting Vietnamese stamps in all their stuff. Because Vietnam's really close to China. It's still in the Yangtze River, if I'm not mistaken. And so they can float everything down the river. They can put a Vietnamese stamp on it. What can you do? I had a gentleman here in Morrison wanted me to invest some money in a vacuum company. And I'm like, what about tariffs? He's like, it won't matter. We're going to make all this stuff in China, but we're going to float it down to Vietnam. We're going to get a Vietnamese tag on it. So I'm not giving you any money. Oh, thanks. I'm not interested. Hopefully he's not watching. But the point is, if you want to get American manufacturing, it's kind of exciting to me if you're going to make it in Morrison because that employs people in this area. But I'm not interested in cheating the system. And so one of the things you have with tariffs that's so ineffective is if you say there's no tariff here, like, I'll give you an example. So when Trump first did his tariffs on China, he did them on soybeans. So what did China stop eating food? Well, here's what's crazy. If you look at trade data, all of a sudden Argentina started seeing this massive amount of exports of soybeans. And guess who was buying our soybeans? Argentina. And guess where China was buying their soybeans from? Argentina. So all you did was you hurt American farmers because you didn't bring down the Chinese, basically because the Argentina became our middleman. They got to keep some of the money for being the middleman, and they cut out American farmers. So if you do a tariff and you say, well, it doesn't apply to him, or him, well, then every business is just going to start sending their stuff there and start selling it here. So Mexico has been the assembly point of a lot of Chinese goods because they make them in China, they ship them to Mexico, they finish them there, and it's made in? But where was it really made? So anyway, we'll see how that all plays out. But anyway, that was kind of off the topic. I like this quote. When you focus on being a blessing, God makes sure that you are always blessed in abundance. Joel Osteen. I'm not saying it's true biblically, but I do like the idea of focusing on being a blessing. I thought that was a pretty cool quote from him. Now, a couple fun facts, and then we're going to talk about tariffs again. This is a big topic. Okay, a federal judge extended a Thursday deadline for federal employees to accept government resignation offer and the severance that comes with it. More than 40,000 federal workers had agreed to resign as of Thursday, and they're basically expecting 5 to 10% of federal workers to agree to leave, and they're trying to save $100 billion a year in expenses. And so I thought that was very interesting because when we're looking at all the noise, I mean, if you look at Donald Trump, probably while we're talking, something is going on. And it's really making me a little skittery because I'm really having to pay attention to my phone all the time, because something new is coming on. And then, of course, I'm kind of a boring person, so what I do is I actually listen to the whole thing. I don't listen to the sound bite. I try to listen to the whole 20 minutes because there's more details in the 20 minutes than there are in the one sound bite. And I think you should all do that because there's such a media bias on right and left to where they're giving you that sound bite. He's going to take over Gaza. And what he actually said in most of that meeting was that most of the people that live in Gaza have a terrible life. They've got a terrible situation. And they're trying to do a deal with Saudi Arabia where Saudi Arabia is going to agree to go in there and rebuild the country and basically take over property ownership. So right now, the United States, if you didn't already know this, before Hamas attacked Israel, Saudi Arabia was about to recognize Israel's right to exist as a country. And that's why Iran unleashed Hamas on Israel. Because they do not want Israel to be recognized by where the most holy Muslim sites are in the world are in Saudi Arabia. And if you guys remember, if you know anything about Islam, you've got Sunni Islamic people and you got Shia mainly. And most of the Persians are Shias and most of the rest of the Muslim world is Sunnis. And they don't necessarily like each other. They don't think they're doing the Bible the same way. Like that quote I just told you. When you focused on being a blessing, God makes sure you always are blessed in abundance. Well, Osteen's probably taken a little bit of a... I don't think God said to Job in the Bible that, hey man, I know you lost your kids and stuff, but if you just focus on being positive, don't worry about your kids dying. But some people might fight me. They don't agree with me on that philosophy. But the way I read the Bible would be a little different. I wouldn't take that quote literal. I like focusing on being a blessing. That's what I wanted to focus on. But just like in Islam, they have different views on what the right way to do things are. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. Is what is the ultimate goal here? What are they really trying to accomplish? We're going to get that in our summary. But another good little article on Mexico. Here's an example with Mexico. So Mexico famously agreed to send how many troops to the border? 10,000? Yeah, 10,000, I think. Okay. What did we give Mexico? No, we actually gave them something. But we listened to American press. So what do we hear? They just bowed down to us. We walked on top of them, stomped them on the ground, and we're just good old Yankee Doodles. Okay? A lot of people don't realize this. But there's 250,000 guns a year sold illegally from the United States to Mexican drug cartels. One of the firearm manufacturers, which I'll probably get in trouble for this one, you just go up the road towards Murfreesboro, it's Barrett Firearms. They're using 50 cals to shoot out police helicopters out of the sky. And Mexico has repeatedly asked to track those guns. To track them. To know why you're selling a 50 cal to a drug cartel member. And I mean, I got a lot of guns. I'll be the first one to tell you. I got a lot of ammo at my house. I got a lot of guns. And if the government tries to come kill me, it's going to happen to a lot of people at once. I'm not really worried about me doing a background check or if they know I've got a gun. They already know, by the way. Artificial intelligence can tell you if you own guns or not. They can look at all your search history. So it's already over. So we should go ahead and do something meaningful to see who's actually buying these guns, right? And so what did we agree? We agreed to track some of those guns to stop limiting U.S. companies, because what Mexico wants to do is Mexico wants to sue Barrett Firearms for letting them sell a 50 cal that took out that police helicopter and killed those police officers. So what did Trump give them? Okay, we'll look at the guns. But what was the soundbite? Well, we killed them. No. They made a smart deal, which is Mexico's going to police their border, and we're going to watch the 250,000 guns that are going illegally from America to Mexico. You guys remember that famous story about Venezuela a few years ago? Venezuela had all this oil, but they had no toilet paper, right? So what they did is the Colombians and the Venezuelans don't trust each other. So they have a truck full of toilet paper on the Colombian side, and they had a truck full of oil on the Venezuelan side, and they'd both drive past each other. And then they would trade like a hostage exchange. Well, that's the same basic concept is, in our country, Mexico's giving us fentanyl, they're giving us people, and we're giving them back guns. And that's a very important part of this observation is, it's not a one-way street. The person that's buying the drugs are Americans, and then we're selling them guns back. And we're helping destabilize Mexico with those guns getting down there. And I think that kind of puts the conversation into a little bit of perspective. You know, if the police were shooting down a helicopter with a gun, you wouldn't want that to occur. Right? What do you say, Greg?
Mexico already knows where the guns are coming from. There's some little gun shop in a town about like maybe Woodbury that's selling like 10,000 guns every 6
Right.
months or something. It's unbelievable.
Well, I'm sure they're getting shut down. I'm sure that's what the deal is they're going to do enforcement. So the good thing about, like, the soundbite is Mexico cares about, and, like, here's the good thing about this, right? We're actually dealing with some of these problems. Whether or not you like how they're being dealt with, they're being dealt with. We don't need 20 million people coming across the border every year. They don't know who they are. That's crazy. And we don't need to be sending a bunch of guns to Mexico so they can kill the police officers. So that's not good. So this is a win-win deal, right? We're going to watch the guns, and they're going to watch how many people come across the border. That's a good thing. And when we look at all the other stuff going on, yeah, I would not run my business the way that they're running the country right now. But I could say that the entire time. But it still gets to the point, what do we want to achieve here as a country? And I think, I think sometimes these are good things. Okay. If we look at, the Blue Cross Blue Shield guy, right? The guy that got shot and killed in New York. Where did that guy buy his gun? Do you guys know? He bought a silencer. Did he buy a gun? He printed it. So how many tracking numbers are on that thing? No, he printed it. He printed a silencer. That guy's a psychopath. He never should come out of prison. Okay? He printed a silencer to kill somebody and then tried to run away. That's anarchy, anarchist. Those are kind of people that want to destroy the country. Just kill him. Move on. Take his gun from him, shoot him back. Oh, solved. That's my opinion. Pretty simple. We don't. Anyway, I'm not advocating killing people, but I do think he should be punished. Sorry, better way. Anyway. Okay.
A certain doctor I worked with said we spend way too much money on trials and jail. Said full that cost 59 cents.
He's right, but there is a certain point though, there's balance, right? We don't want like what they have in China, where, and I shouldn't have said that exactly, but the point is, he does deserve punishment. Probably shouldn't be executed somewhere early. Should be convicted and then executed. But the point is, there is a degree of where people should be, like you got a lot of people that are illegally sentenced, like Nelson Mandela, who didn't deserve to be in jail. So we do need to have rights for people that are in criminal. Okay. So if you look at Treasury Secretary Bessanet, and he's currently in charge of the Treasury, he has a real big plan. And I encourage you to watch his videos. It's 3, 3, and 3 plan. Now, here's what's crazy about this guy, right? Guess who he used to work for? George Soros, who is a huge donor to the Democratic Party. Guess what his sexual orientation is? He's gay. Okay? And this is the guy who is establishing all the economic policy for the United States, really. Now think about the irony of that, right? That normally would be a very bipartisan pick, right? Guy's gay. He worked for George Soros. So clearly he has friends that are Democrats and friends that are Republicans. He's probably my favorite person in the Treasury Department or in the government right now because he's actually pretty smart. And I'm not saying the other ones aren't, but he's really very smart. Okay? So his goal is 3, 3, and 3. And so when we look at this, the goal for the administration is bring the federal deficit to 3% of GDP. To bring U.S. oil production, increase U.S. oil production, 3 million barrels a day. And bring the 10-year Treasury to 3% instead of 4.5%. Basically bring interest rates down. 10-year Treasury is the most important interest rate in the world. Why? Federal Reserve doesn't matter that much. What really matters is the 10-year Treasury. Why? How many of you guys get Social Security? Raise your hand. What does Social Security invest their money in? 10-year Treasury. How many of you guys get Medicare? What does Medicare invest their money in? U.S. government, majority U.S. government is financed over a 10-year period. And here's the thing. When we spend $1 trillion on interest payments alone in our country, it matters. Because that's $1 trillion not going to help people, to our military, to whatever. Because we're paying interest to the bank. Because if you have a bunch of debt, you're a slave to the bank. One of the best things Bradley ever did was he went out and bought a house in Viola, Tennessee. That just brings me warm fuzzies, right? Because he should work harder. Because he's in debt, right? I keep trying to get Hayden to buy a big house. Hadn't done it yet. So I'm teasing, but the point is, if you have debt, if you have a mortgage, do you own your house? The bank does. And if the bank doesn't like what you're doing, can they call that mortgage? Absolutely. If it's a federal mortgage and a federal backed agency, they don't do that, but in local governments, but they could. What's to stop the government from rewriting the laws and just saying, everybody pay us back? Could they do that? You bet they could, because they write the laws. So if you have debt, you are owned by the person that gave you the money. Like the Bible says, you're a slave to the lender. Okay, so what they're really trying to do is very important. And also, the reason why the 10-year treasury matters so much is when you look at your monthly statement, you say, how much money did I make? That's not how most of the money in the world operates. Most of the money in the world operates like it's a chess game. If you're Harvard's endowment and you want this endowment to last the next 1,000 years, do you care that much if the market went up or down today? Not really. So I'll give you an example. If you can get 10% in a CD, or you can get 10% in the stock market with risk, what are you going to do? Everyone's going to buy the CD, right? So when you look at what we call long-term investing, most people look at that as a 10-year period. How much money am I going to make over Dave Ramsey, right? Look for mutual funds with 10-year track records. I mean, that sounds great, except for what if the guy that managed that mutual fund retired last week and there's somebody new there? I mean, did you have a 10-year track record? Because you got a new person there. Not really. But when the 10-year treasury goes up, large institutions move money out of the stock market and they put it in guaranteed funds. Because you have to get paid for your risk. So if they bring down interest rates, that's going to bring up the valuation on the stock market because people can't make as much money in a CD, so they're going to put more money into real estate and right. And that's why this matters so much. Okay. It also matters to car loans, right? Because a lot of crazy people right now, they do 10-year and 7-year car loans. How much is the payment? How much is the payment? Ugh. You want to bring down car prices, keep everybody at 5-year loans. If you got a 5-year loan, they can't afford the payment. They'll start buying little Altimas again, and then Ford will stop selling trucks and they'll start building little cars. And their cars will cost less. But if you let people finance it for 10 years on a thing that's not going to be worth anything in 10 years, So, that's just economics. Because most people focus on the payment, okay? If you bring down interest rates, though, it's going to really help that company in Deckard and that company in Smyrna that's really struggling right now, a little company called Nissan, because when interest rates are 8%, people can't afford the payment, and so they don't buy a new car, okay? The deficit, though, is the big part here. Our government spends too much money. And I'm going to show you some information on it so you guys can see it. Hey, Bradley, can you help me out with this? Give it to Hayden. Now, this right here is, this is federal spending by year. Okay. Now, this is just spending. This has nothing to do with here. Now, if you notice, before COVID, our country was spending, we had a little jump. We went from about $4 trillion in spending to about 4.45. But look at what's happened since COVID. Okay? This is not sustainable. You guys ever studied the French Revolution? Okay. Who are the ladies that killed Marie Antoinette? They were actually called the fish wives. Because what they did is they caught fish. And Marie Antoinette was so rich that what she would do is she would have the poor fishwives come in to Versailles and do a play for her every year. Okay? And so they have, I think it was, I can't remember how much it was, so this is totally probably bad information, but it's relatively close. So it was called a sou, a piece of bread, because the French government paid for every piece of bread, they paid 4 sous per bread. So the average French person would buy a piece of bread for 5 sous. When the French government ran out of money, they couldn't borrow any more money, they couldn't pay for the bread. And the next day, the French bread prices went to 9 sous per piece of bread, aka food stamps. The food stamps ended, people couldn't afford food. So what did they do next? Those women marched to Versailles to come get her. And it's actually, she built a secret tunnel, probably for her lover from Sweden. I've actually been in the tunnel. It's kind of cool. But she just happened to escape out of the tunnel when they came in the room with their knives and started stabbing her pillows to kill her. That's how she saved death for a while. Based on what happened to her later, she probably should have just died there, been better for her. Because they ended up torturing her kids. It's a terrible story. Worst thing they could ever imagine. Okay? She would have been better off just go ahead and let it go. Okay? But when the price of bread went up and doubled overnight, that's when the French Revolution was unleashed. When the government ran out of money, that's when things went bad. And if you look at this curve right here, these deficits are not, this spending is not sustainable. If you look at the government in 2019, we spent $4.45 trillion in 2019. And now, 10 years later, we're on pace to spend almost $8 trillion. You want to know why there's inflation? It's because of deficits and too much money printing. And both, by the way, who was Trump in 2020? Who was president in 2020? I just said it. It was Trump. When that first started taking off, the president was Trump. And Biden he did even better. He kept spending money. So when we start looking at the goal here, all of this stuff around trying to reduce government spending and change the way we do stuff is based on this 3, 3, and 3 plan. We want to get the deficit to no more than 3%. And what that basically means is our economy will grow faster than the government. If our economy grows faster than the government, then you can balance the budget. That's what Clinton did in the 1990s, is they started freezing government spending, the economy grew faster, and all of a sudden we had a surplus. But you can't keep spending money like this. Or what I just talked about with the Sioux and the French, would be coming to a town near you. Okay? And that's when a society gets in trouble, is when the price of food goes up. But when that really occurs is when the government runs out of money. And of course, what the government did there was really dumb, is they were giving everybody a subsidy for food. And then they got no rain in the river, the Seine River, and the other rivers in France. They got no rain. Well, they had basically those mills that turned the wheat into bread weren't moving. So they had a drought hit, they ran out of money, and it all hit at once. The worst day, right? And then one of the worst forces in the human race was unleashed. The French Revolution is one of the most disastrous things. I mean, they went crazy. They killed every Christian they could find. That was every monk, every priest, every nun. It was terrible. And it was unleashed because of money. And so what the goal here is, and I'm not saying this is the way I would do things. I'm not saying you should vote for this. I'm just telling you what is happening. And so if you look at all the noise, if you produce 3 million barrels a day more oil and more natural gas, what's the price of gasoline going to do? It's going to go down. If the price of fuel goes down, inflation, because here's the thing, right? What is the number one product a farmer has to use? What are the products a farmer uses to make food? Diesel. And what else? Fertilizer. And what is fertilizer made out of? Natural gas. Remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, we had all that cheap natural gas, it all went away and fertilizer went up? It's because of natural gas. Okay? Diesel, fertilizer, and of course your seed, right? And your pesticides, which are also made out of energy, natural gas, I'm sure. Okay? So if you want to bring down the price of food, you got to bring down the price of diesel. And when I was a kid, diesel was cheaper than regular gas. Why?
Less refined than
Right.
regular gas.
It's less work. But because there's no diesel refineries growing, we have what? And a lot of regulations, we got expensive diesel. And I'm not saying regulations shouldn't be there. It may be better for the environment not to have these regulations. But it doesn't change the fact that the reason why it costs so much money for an egg is because of a flu and because of these other things. Or the reason why cows cost so much money is, look, that farmer's got to feed the cow. And we haven't had a lot of rain at the end of the year. That's a lot of hay. And by the way, if it's not raining at your farm, is it raining at your neighbor's? Probably not. So that means you're trucking it in on a diesel truck. And by the way, one of the things I thought was really, not to pick on him, but was a low blow, what did Biden ban his last 2 days in office? Russian oil. And guess what that Russian oil is used to make? Diesel. The only reason why we import Russian oil is because heavy crude can be converted to diesel easier. And he waited till he left office the last time to ban Russian crude. If you really want to stand on ethics, why don't you do that right before re-election? I'm not saying you should have. I'm just saying the timing was terrible. And nobody read it because it's one of the secondary stories. Okay? Canadians have a lot of that crude. And if we put tariffs on Canada, which is not a great plan in my opinion, because I like the Canadians, and I don't really want them to be a 51st state. But the point is, and guess what? They don't want to be either. I've never seen Canadians get mad before. They're mad now. They're pretty much the nicest people on earth, and they're mad. I mean, I got a buddy of mine who's like, he actually thinks we're coming to conquer them. I'm like, Russell, we're not coming to get you, but if you do, you fit in great here. I'll help you be a citizen. I'm just kidding. Anyway, the point is, I'm just teasing him, because he's 7 feet tall and he's just having fun. He might be watching. But the point is, they've got a lot of that heavy crude. So hopefully, what they're really trying to do with Canada is trying to get some of that crude so we can make more diesel. Because you got to remember, there's a secondary thing going on here. There's the soundbite. Oh, 10,000 troops at the Mexican border. We're gonna kind of stop sending guns there. Right? So there might be a deal here if you're getting rid of Russian crude, which is a good thing. I don't want to buy Russian crude. They're killing people in Ukraine. But we got to get that crude from somebody else. So why don't we go ahead and get the new crude before we ban the other one? Before we tell the Russians we don't want theirs, why don't we get 1 million barrels a day from the Canadians? And some maple syrup. It's pretty good too. So the point is, and that's kind of the plan. So all of the stuff going on here really, really appears to be related to this 3, 3, and 3 plan. And by the way, I'm not saying it's going to work. But if it did work, it would be really good for investors. If you could get inflation down, the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates, which means mortgages will get cheaper. If you can get 3 million barrels a day more fuel, it's going to bring down your gas prices. If you get the government to spend only a 3% more than they bring in, now think about how dumb that is too, right? Our goal is to spend 3% more money than we bring in a year. How many customers come to me and say, my goal is to spend more money than I make?
So what about the tariffs and the stuff that's coming in? Isn't
It's a great question, Darla. Okay. You did, but it's a great question. So you got two parts right here. So you got tariffs. And when you put a 25% tariff on steel, and you don't give that company time to build that factory here, it's going to cost 25% more money for steel. But what does that also do for the federal government? You're paying more for your steel, and who's getting that 25%? The government is. So now, the government doesn't have to print as much money because you're paying more for your stuff. It's a tax increase. But Trump said no taxes increasing. There's no taxes aren't going up. Whoa. No, it's a tax increase. It's actually also a positive in some ways because now our deficit goes down. That means, okay, I'm not saying that I agree with the policy. I'm just saying it has, they're talking about everything costing more to the consumer, but they're not talking about the fact that when that tax money comes in, the federal government gets more money to pay their bills. That's a big part of this, right? Because why do we have so much inflation? We spend too much money and we print too much money. It's undeniable. There is no data point that doesn't indicate that in the last 5 years, we have not just been a drunk with money. If you start throwing $20 bills out like it's water, you will not have money at a certain point. Okay? So, you're right. So now these tariffs are going to pay for tax cuts. I mean, that's what's happening because in the requisite, when they do a bill, they got to pay for themselves. They got to get the deficit down. So what they're going to do is they're going to raise the price of stuff made overseas. They're going to bring in more money, and they're going to cut your taxes. Maybe not yours, but somebody's. Okay? And, but also what it does do, here's the problem, right? Because we know we had Biden for 4 years. We had Trump for 4 years of that. We got Trump now. We're probably going to have a Democrat in 4 years. So if that's the case, it's terrible for business because what do businesses like? Steady, consistency, certainty. Right? It's like, okay, I mean, if you're like, let's say you took all your money out and you risked it and you built a windmill farm manufacturing process. Like, we're going to make windmills. Huh. How do you think the bank feels about you today? Huh. All those credits go away? They're not going to buy your windmills? But I borrowed my life savings to start this factory. Okay? And what's going to happen probably 4 years from now? We got to get those windmills going again. You see how stupid this is? Because it creates where people won't make decisions. So if you're a power company, and we need 40% to 60% more power 10 years from now than we have now, what do you start doing? You going to build windmills? What kind? Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe. They're talking about it. That's a 10-year commitment. What if we get somebody that's next president and he doesn't like nuclear power because we're all going to die of radioactive waste? So what do? Tell you what I do. I get me some diesel generators. You know why? Because that price of diesel is probably going to go down a little bit. And if they don't buy them here, I can take that generator up, I can pick it up, I can go somewhere else, and I can use my power plant there. All I got to do is have to have a semi-truck. Now, I'm telling you right now, this is dumb because you don't get, it's like an executive order, right? Ken, I'm telling you, there's a man and a woman. 4 years later, Ken, there's, I don't know what. Okay? The point is, you're changing policy all the time. So, right? So here's what we can do, right? You know, it's kind of like, welcome to Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee. 4 years from now, or 2 years from now, we can take all those signs down. We got a new governor. Here's what I like them to do. I don't care who the governor is. Why don't you say, welcome to Tennessee? I don't want to have to change all the signposts. You know? My favorite one was, when I was driving to church in Nashville, that's when they were doing the 0.2 of a mile markers on the highway. I'm like, really? Like, we need a marker every 0.2 of a mile. Because you know what happens? A semi-truck comes in and plows through the markers. So what do we got to do? Run over there and put some more markers down. I mean, we got GPS. I mean, come on. Anyway, I'm sure there's a use for it. But the point is it costs a lot of money. And so the problem with executive orders and the problem with the new Trump administration is if you're looking at a power plant company, they may build the modular nuclear reactors. And the modular nuclear reactors is what everybody's talking about because it's like a diesel generator. You go out, you build it in a factory, you plug it in, and you got power. And the cool thing is it's modular, which means it's mobile. So if we're stupid in 4 years and we don't like them, somebody else is probably going to want them, probably China. Because guess who's been building the most nuclear power plants? China has been. But here's the good thing, though. Like, if they all blow up in China, that won't affect the air here. I was teasing. You know, I just remember last spring, or was it summer? Maybe it was the fall. We were getting that sand dust from the Sahara. They had that big sandstorm, and the dust was clouding our sky up. And you're like, well, we're not affected by what happens in the rest of the world. Well, outside it kind of looks like we're affected. Anyway, you know, and so I agree. Nuclear power is the way to go because it's clean and it solves both political narratives because the Democratic Party doesn't want more carbon in the air, and the Republican Party wants consistent power. So nuclear is the way to go. And the modular reactors are the way to go, but they're also dumb, right? Because they only generate so much power. What they really need to do is build legitimate nuclear power plants. But nobody's ever going to fund that. And no bank's going to give you the money either. Because they don't know who the next president's going to be. And they don't know what the policies are going to be 4 years from now. And if you don't know, if you think you're going to lose all your money 4 years from now, what would you do with your money? Yeah, you would not invest that way. And I would not ask you to. So this is common sense. So what do you need if you want to get power solutions? Democrats and Republicans got to get together and they got to agree. What's the odds of that happening? Okay, unfortunately low. You know, but Tennessee, we used to be the model for that. And so if you look at what Trump's proposing, he wants to end the tax on tips. By the way, we're going to start having a tip jar here at the office. I'm just kidding. Anyway, you will get a fee reduction for a tip jar because 35% taxes. Anyway, so how's that going to work? I mean, to me, that's a dumb policy, but whatever. I can be paid in tips. You know, we're kind of customer service. We'll give you guys some food. You know, whatever you want to do. We can actually. I'll tell you right now. If we transform all of our fees to tips, we'll be happy to provide lunch every time you come in. You know, and we need to eat 4 or 5 times a day, every appointment. So, you know, whatever it needs to be to make it happen. You see how someone could cheat the system? Just thinking about it out loud. In taxes and Social Security payments. Okay. I mean, it sounds good. Who has 77% of the wealth in the country? Retirees. So let's not pay taxes. Okay, well, look at that deficit. Look how much money we're spending. That's my opinion. He still might do it, but whew. In taxes on overtime pay. Now, this is kind of cool because it's actually pretty smart. It's actually one I like. You know why I like it? You ever been to Greece? Ever heard of Greece? Yeah. Okay. Guess what they just did last year? You guys remember? Who wants to buy a little Greek village? Anybody want to buy them? They're for sale. You can buy the whole village. The whole place. It's all yours. Italy, too. Why is that happening? They're running out of people. They don't have enough people. So what did Greece do? 48-hour mandatory work week. Advisors with mortgages, 60-hour work week. Just kidding. They didn't get it. Anyway, from earlier. Anyway, so, bad joke. Anyway, so, but the point is, that's, Hayden got out of that one. Anyway, I'm picking up Riley today. So, but the point is, that's what they're doing because they're running out of people. Well, if you end the tax and overtime, this labor shortage where we don't have enough machinists and people to, it's great to build steel here. Wait a minute, though. How many of your grandkids are steel workers? How many of them are miners? Oh, By the way, who wants to climb into a mine and dig coal? Right? Okay? We don't have enough people that know how to do these things. So if you end the overtime tax, it would be kind of smart because you would get more labor out of the people. And by the way, he didn't say in Social Security tax, he said income tax. Well, that means you get more Social Security tax money. And people like money. So they know that overtime is not taxed. Huh. I want to work overtime. You know, I think I'll draw a salary and start paying myself overtime. Oh, yes. Again, this is where these laws, I don't like them because they're a great way to cheat. Anyway, my opinion. You know, it's like, you know why the sales tax is such a great tax? Everybody pays it. You can't cheat it. You know, you buy a car, yeah, you can go to Georgia, but guess when your plates get renewed or you get pulled over by that state trooper, where do you live? You know, right? You pay, everybody pays. The drug dealers pay too, right? Because when they go buy a Snickers or they go eat, they're still buying food. You know, it's a positive way to get money. Drug dealers don't pay income tax, right? They do pay sales tax. And I guarantee you, Tennessee has a lot of those people driving through the state because we've got a lot of highways. And we're getting money off them. Everybody pays. It's a really good thing. And so another thing is in the tax breaks for a sports team. Did you guys realize the NFL was a nonprofit organization? That means they don't pay taxes. What Trump just said he's going to raise taxes in the NFL? He should. I think it's really dumb that they build stadiums for 8 games that cost billions of dollars to be used 8 times a year. I mean, you know, that's why I'm a baseball fan anyway. But think about baseball, right? If they build a baseball stadium in Nashville, it's 81 games plus concerts that they can raise revenue. The reason why the Titans are building a dome is because nobody wants to sit out in that dome today. Because there's no dome. If there's a dome, you want to what? Well, I don't care. It's nice and warm in here. Right. It's a really smart move because that's what they should have done to begin with. Because it'll be used all the time. Bridgestone Arena, last time I looked, which is 2 years ago, was the 6th most used stadium in North America. That's why Haslam bought them, right? He sold his gas stations. He bought the Predators. He bought Bridgestone Arena because he can make more money. Pretty smart move. And then he also wants to increase military spending and give $150 billion for border security. Now, obviously, this is why we don't get bipartisanship, right? Because the Republicans are saying, we got to cut all these social programs, but we're going to spend more money in the military. How about this? Why are we building aircraft carriers anymore when a drone can fly 2,000 miles an hour and cost maybe $5,000 and you're spending, I don't know, $20 billion on an aircraft carrier? Do you think the aircraft carriers are going to survive a war with China? I mean, look at what happened in Ukraine, right? You probably don't pay as much attention to it. We sent them all those Abrams tanks. So the first thing the Ukrainians did is they drove those tanks right to Moscow and they shot Putin. No, all those tanks were taken out or sitting behind because they built drones to come in and, yeah, they've got a drone right now that's this size, and they put a C4 on it. It comes up to Richard, blows him up in the head and kills him. That didn't cost much to make, right? It's kind of scary. Hopefully no one wants to kill me today. But the point is, that's the military's fighting World War II when we should be fighting what the next war is going to be. It's going to be cutting the power off. It's going to be cyber attacks. It's going to be what you're already, I mean, look at Ukraine and say, that's what's happening. What's the Russians doing? They're cutting the power grid because they can't grow food. They're hitting their utility lines. But you guys ever, not that, if you guys study history or not, World War II, before World War II, there was the Spanish Civil War. And in the Spanish Civil War, the Germans showed that they could use airplanes to really just dominate the sky. And they helped the fascists win Spain. Okay? Guess where the Germans bought those engines from? You guys know the company? Rolls-Royce. British engines. So when they did the Battle of Britain, you could hear the Rolls-Royce engine churning as it's bombing your own people. That was what happened in World War II. And our country, we built all these you remember we built those battleships? Remember Pearl Harbor? Battleship Row? Oh yeah, we only need 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific, but we need 20 battleships. What did the Japanese do? We're going to hit the battleships. And they're dumb. They're like flying aircraft carriers to hit our battleships, and they think they want to blow the battleships up. What should they have targeted? The carriers, because in the war, that's what the new battlefield is. Well, now in the next war, we're seeing in Ukraine, it's not tanks. It's not aircraft carriers. It's drones. Lots and lots of drones. Because all these kids are used to playing computer games, right? And then they sit there, target the drone, blow it up. That's the next war. But our country still is going to spend $1 trillion with this budget on defense to build battleships, aka aircraft carriers. If they can cut government spending on social programs, they can also cut it on defense. When I can go to Walmart and get a $2,000 drone, get about 20 of them, sink an aircraft carrier, financially, this is a much better deal. And if you look at the base out there, with the hypersonic weapons they're working on, it's very clear that they know that we need that. So let's put money into that versus building massive things that aren't going to work. Every one of those is going to be the bottom of the ocean. And there's going to be 5,000 sailors with them because we got to make sure that company gets their money. If you want to do...
Why is China building so many battleships?
They're not. They're building small diesel-powered ships mainly, Richard. So what China's been doing is China actually only has... They don't have a blue water navy. They have a Taiwanese navy. And so what China has mainly been building is smaller ships that can't even go 2,000 miles. And so if you actually look at the data and what they are trying to build aircraft carrier. You know, the first one was a floating casino. One of their aircraft carriers is a floating casino they bought from Ukraine, which built from Russia, but you can't fly anything off of it. The second one was a training ship, and they have one legitimate aircraft carrier, but if you also notice, it doesn't have a catapult. So like they have this big old... So they're using technology from World War II, and we're like using magnets to, you know, and that sounds great, but if you look at China, and what did China also do? They bought a bunch of Russian weapons, which, by the way, don't work. What are the Russians buying? You know who Russia's buying their weapons from? Iran. They bought from, well, actually what happened is one of our drones crashed, the Iranians recovered it, and they've been copying it for the suicide drone. And early in the war, they figured those suicide drones were the way to go, and the Russians, who were the second largest arms dealer in the world, started buying Iranian drones. And they started building Iranian drone factories across the world. My favorite one, though, was the Chinese nuclear missiles. So President Xi found out they were selling the rocket fuel for alcohol. Because apparently, you can drink rocket fuel like vodka. And so they filled a bunch of their nuclear missiles up with water because they drunk all the rocket fuel, or sold it off, and they filled it full of water. Well, once you fill a rocket full of water, it's toast. And that's the thing with the reason why the U.S. military weapons, a lot of our weapons work, so we're getting a lot of orders, right? And the Koreans are getting a lot of orders. Oddly enough, the Koreans have some really good weapons. But the thing with the military is they always are fighting the last war. And you need to fight the new war. And we can save money. The bottom line is, it ain't going to be any good if we go to war if we don't have any money. We've won every war we've ever been in because we had a bigger checkbook. That's how you win a war. This one works pretty well, I'm going to buy those. Well, that didn't work very well. We're not buying any more of those. World War II, right? Famously, we didn't have enough stuff. But we knew what to build early on. That was aircraft carriers, and we started building stuff. World War II, sorry. And then, even when we fought the The Spanish, battleships, Navy, took the Philippines, took Cuba. We did that back when those, and that's what was, but the next war is going to be different. It's going to be like the Ukraine war. Shut the power grid off. Blow up the tractors, blow up the farming equipment. No combines. Run them out of food. That's what the war would be like. Because here's the thing, right? If you got a drone for $1,000 and you can blow up $1 million combine, is that a pretty good investment for the military? Would you, if you're fighting a war, would you spend $2,000 to blow up $1 million piece of farm equipment? All day long. See, I always thought it was amazing. The Ukrainians let Russia send the natural gas through the whole time. There's no way an American would ever do that. I'm telling you right now, this American would. You kill my kids, I'm blowing them all up. They're all gone. Taking them all down. I don't care what the treaty is. I don't care if I get arrested. I got nothing to live for. And I mean, when the British came here, what did everybody do? We can't beat them one-on-one. I'm going to hide in a tree, shoot, and run. And while they're marching, I'm high-stepping. And that's how we won the war. I mean, that's what George Washington did. What did he do? He just stayed alive. All George Washington did in the war is, everybody's like, we need to go fight the British. I'm like, we're going to lose. So what did he do? Goal number 1, stay alive. Goal number 2, stay alive. Goal number 3, stay alive. And that's why he was such a great president and a great leader too, because he knew, I can't beat them one-on-one, so what am I going to do? We'll just wait till they want to leave. Right? And when they won the Battle of Yorktown, but remember, they had 20,000 British in New York City, and they just decided to leave. Because the British government got tired of paying the bills. And the French, of course, brought the Navy in and blocked the men at Yorktown. And George Washington, unfortunately, lost his adopted son at that battle from disease. He never let him fight in the war until that battle, and he dies from disease. But what he always knew is, I can't beat him one-on-one, so what am I going to do? If you look back at the Civil War, that's what the Confederate Army didn't understand. We're going to go charge head on. Well, you're outnumbered, 10-1. They've got all the food they can eat. You remember, have you ever been, my kids asked me, well, what were the major battles? And we were talking about some major battles. And I was talking about the Battle of Chancellorsville. So in Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson snuck around, and you can actually walk the trail still today. He snuck around the Union Army and came on them. But they've been marching all day in the hot July heat in Virginia. So when they got to the Union Army tents, what did they want to do? They wanted to eat. So all this food was there. And so the army basically fell apart because they were so hungry and thirsty. They were all breaking into tents and taking food and water. And so the reason why he got shot was he was trying to get his army back together, and he was coming back to his lines, and they shot him. Well, they didn't know. Basically, the Union Army ran away, and the Southern Army's eating all the food. That's why, in every war, you always win with the stomach. Patton always said the reason why he knew I'll stop with this other stuff. They knew why the Germans were defeated was the Germans used horses to carry their food, and we used trucks. Right? Well, guess what happens in the winter? They started eating all their horses too. That's how they knew it was done. But anyway, any questions? Oh, invest in my educational place. Do your best to find accurate tax, legal, and financial and accounting advice through these systems before you make a decision. Cool. Oh, yes. One other thing I was going to mention to you guys as well. So what day is it coming here?
February 25th.
So February 25th, the estate attorney we normally use, Jonathan Burns, is going to be here at 8 a.m. We're starting a little earlier that morning. He's meeting with customers that day. We're also coming to the Ag Extension Office in Franklin County on what day? 25th. The 25th. And that'll be live streamed on the Coffee County Extension Office on the two of them. So we are coming, and he's going to talk about, wills, trusts, estate planning. Tennessee obviously has some really good laws that Bill has them put in place for estate planning. If you don't know what a community property trust is, you probably should watch one of our YouTube videos, but he's going to be here in person at 8 a.m. on the 25th to talk with clients, and then he does have a lot of appointments already booked, but he's a great guy to meet. You'd like him, but he's coming 8 a.m. here on the 25th. So that is about 2 weeks from today. So he'll be here. So if you want to come, we are going to do it a little differently with him. We're probably going to do about an hour and a half, but you're free to come and go. We will have breakfast, of course, and treats because we're expecting tips in the future. Just kidding. Anyway, but that's actually illegal, so don't actually give me a tip. Hopefully, SEC regulars not watching. We're not actually taking tips. Anyway, but the point is, I think it's illegal. Anyway, but he's going to be here. So I want to invite you guys to come to that. It's a great way to learn. He's also coming to McMinnville at 8 a.m. on Thursday. So if you can't make Tuesday, the 25th, it'd be the 27th. He's coming to McMinnville, and that room is a little bigger than this room. So if you do want to come over there and see our new office, you're welcome to come see that as well. But he will be here on that day. Thanks for coming, guys.
Okay, who buys most of our debt? China.
Oh, our banks.
Really?
Oh, yeah. China has about $1 trillion in direct U.S. debt holdings. They think